Welcome to the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. I am Jeremiah Regan.
I'm Juan. We're back with Understanding Capitalism, Lecture 6, Technology and Resources.
This is an interesting lecture because it involves things like microchips and LED light bulbs, as well as water and soil and trees, and how these things relate to each other in a capitalist economy.
Yeah, I've always considered myself a bit of an environmentalist, and in the sense that, not in the modern leftist sense that, you know, the environment is an end in itself and it needs to be protected above human needs. I think God gave us the world to steward it and use it for our needs, but at the same time, we need to therefore be responsible with it.
Can't really call yourself a conservative if you won't conserve foundational things like natural resources.
That's right. But I think something that I appreciate about this lecture is how innovation plays an important role in capitalism and in conserving resources, right? I always like to say one of the greatest inventions for the environment in the last 100 years is probably the LED bulb. It allows us to produce light much more efficiently, getting more out of the resources that we have.
And Professor Steele, who's a bit of an outdoorsman himself, brings home this point nicely. As humans discover new technological means, there are more efficient ways to use the resources that we have. Therefore, we leave more for others, including our posterity.
And we're getting here to the end of this course on capitalism. We're on lecture 6 and then out of 7 lectures. So we'd like to see if you can suggest what we should do for the next course.
Yeah, we'd like to hear from you.
So you can find our podcast either in YouTube or Spotify, which allows you to comment and let us know what you'd like us to do next.
Or if you're on Apple, leave us a review and you can include a suggestion for the next course we convert into a podcast right there. In fact, while you're at it, please subscribe and please do leave us reviews so that we know how we're doing and so that others can hear about this podcast.
And it actually, reviews help us a lot. I didn't know this until I started working in marketing, that the platforms that we put our podcast in actually pay attention to reviews. So if you're liking what you're hearing, please give us a good review.
Now let's turn to Professor Steele with Lecture 6 of Understanding Capitalism, Technology and Resources.
Our economic system, based on individual freedom, private initiative, and free trade, has produced more human progress than any other in history.
Welcome to Lesson 6. Is capitalism sustainable? In 1968, entomologist Paul Ehrlich published his book, The Population Bomb, and his answer was no. We will destroy ourselves with overpopulation. The authors of The Limits to Growth agreed, predicting that the world would soon run out of resources. In fact, they argued modern civilization is not sustainable. We are doomed unless we undergo radical social and political transformation. As it turns out, they were entirely wrong. Capitalism is actually the way out of the limited resources trap. Our resource base today is larger than it was when they wrote. We have more resources today, not less. We are not running out. How can this possibly be? In this lesson, we will examine more closely the nature of technology, resources, and knowledge to see how our resource base grows as our economy grows. Understanding these issues throws more light on innovation, entrepreneurship, and the pricing system. That is, how capitalism really works. In Lesson 3, we saw the crucial importance of knowledge. Each of us acts to pursue our purposes and objectives. We choose from among possibilities and opportunities we face. What are those possibilities? They are not simply dictated by nature or circumstances. They are dependent also on our knowledge of cause and effect and how we can effect change and accomplish things. In economics, this is what is meant by technology. Technology is the means of combining resources to pursue opportunities. It includes engineering, but it is more than that. As we've seen, technology includes organization, contracting, how to handle human relations, and many other things. It is about how to devote the many aspects of reality to the satisfaction of human purposes and needs. Technology is knowledge. This is a key point. Physical material is limited, but the potential for growing our knowledge is not limited. There is always more to discover and to learn. Leonard E. Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, put it this way: we can think of knowledge as a candle in the dark. It lights an area, a circle around us. The dark boundary at the edge of this circle is what we recognize that we don't know. As our knowledge accumulates, as the candle gets brighter, the boundary of what we recognize we do not know gets larger. Our unanswered questions grow faster than our answers. The more we know, the more we realize how much more there is to learn. Humans have barely begun to understand the nature of our universe. The potential to develop new ways to meet human needs and flourish is, so far as we know, unlimited. Our potential for technological growth does not have set limits. It might seem we've taken an abstract philosophical turn here, but this has direct application to the question of resources. As we learn more ways to devote the materials of the universe to meeting human needs, we expand our resource base. As our knowledge expands, things which were once not considered to be useful now become resources. Our resource base expands. Also, as we learn ways to make a given technology more efficient, we can do more with a given set of materials. Again, we expand our resource base. This is completely counterintuitive on the surface. Aren't the physical stocks of resources finite? How can they grow as we use them? There's no new iron ore, petroleum, or other minerals in the ground being produced. Some resources are renewable, such as forests and fish populations, but these too are finite and can be overused. The early 19th century English economist Robert Malthus worried that human population would grow faster than food supply, dooming us to a large, impoverished population. Another great English economist, William Stanley Jevons, calculated that England would exhaust its coal supplies by 1900. Yet today, 200 years after Malthus wrote, world population is at least 8 times greater than it was in his time, and a smaller share live in abject poverty than at any time previously. And England has not run out of coal. How could these thoughtful men have been so mistaken? The key is understanding the advance of human knowledge. Most economists in the 1800s missed the point. Improvements in our knowledge expand understanding of what is possible. Scientific knowledge is important, but by itself, it cannot tell us how to create more value, more wealth. Entrepreneurial innovation discovers ways of applying new knowledge to meet human needs. Advances in basic knowledge, coupled with entrepreneurship, lead to new and more effective ways of advancing society. Here's an example. During World War II, more than half the steel produced by the United States came from iron ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range. By the end of the war, the stock of ore seemed nearly gone. The president of Republic Steel calculated that the stock would be exhausted in 7 years at most. The only ores remaining would be too poor to be usable. What he did not foresee was the invention of a new process, pelletization, that made inferior ores economically viable. Not only did pelletization turn inferior ore into a resource, the processing of these pellets into steel also took less energy and less labor. The effectiveness of blast furnaces more than doubled. Our stock of iron ore grew because of technological innovation. We could do more work with less material. Economist Julian Simon describes the general process of technological innovation this way.
The more that we use of natural resources, the more we have of them. That is, rather than natural resources becoming more scarce as we use them, they have been becoming more available, contrary to all common sense, to all standard Malthusian thinking.
As given stocks of resources are used, their scarcity increases. This increases the price and increases the returns to innovation, creating profit opportunities for those who can find ways to address the scarcity. The resulting entrepreneurial discoveries leave us better off than before, with a larger effective resource base. Simon illustrates this with the example of the use of copper wire for transmitting telephone communications. When telephones were first invented, the wire used in transmitting signals was relatively thick and consumed substantial quantities of copper. As technology advanced, wires could be made thinner, economizing on the use of copper. This process continued until it took no copper at all to transmit signals, as it was replaced first by fiber optic cable and then cellular communication. As Simon points out, it is not copper wire or any other resource that we desire. It is the services these resources provide. It is not raw scientific or engineering knowledge that constitutes innovation. Entrepreneurial innovation is discovery of cost-effective methods that pass the profit-loss test. Another dramatic example is the development of horizontal fracturing technology, fracking, in making North Dakota's Bakken Formation into a major source of oil, as well as creating the shale gas revolution. Prior to the development of horizontal fracking, the region overlying the Bakken was a limited producer of oil. Much of the petroleum in the Bakken is in tiny bubbles or pockets in the rock and was not accessible in any cost-effective way. Such rock was not a resource. That changed with the development of horizontal fracking, a cost-effective method of freeing large quantities of this oil for extraction. What had once been useless rock became a valuable resource. It was the advance in human knowledge that converted it into a resource. Similarly, the Marcellus Formation under Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia was thought to contain perhaps 2 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, most of it not recoverable. The development of horizontal drilling and fracking changed that. Estimates of recoverable natural gas went into the tens of trillions of cubic feet. As a result of these breakthroughs, America not only became energy independent, it became an exporter of natural gas. Economic innovation, driven by entrepreneurship, overcame what seemed to be a physical limit to resources. But what then do we mean by resource? This highlights something crucial. Resource is an economic concept, not a physical one. For something to be a resource implies it can be devoted to human purpose. This depends on our knowledge and our purposes. Engineer and space entrepreneur Robert Zubrin has noted this.
This is when we first set sail for other worlds.
Zubrin is president of the Mars Society and developer of the Mars Direct Plan for establishing a permanent human colony on Mars. He emphasizes there are no resources on Mars, only materials. They're not resources until humans create them, using our ingenuity to apply materials to our purposes. And as we advance our knowledge, our resource base expands rather than shrinks. Physical quantities of stuff are not the issue. These may well be finite and fixed. What is essential for human well-being is what we can do with them. What services can we generate? What needs can we satisfy? What wealth can we create? To see this another way, consider this example. In the early days of America, if one were to compile a list of resources available, oil deposits would not have been on the list. The oil seeps on the ground were considered nuisances. Someone drilling a water well and instead striking oil would have been disappointed. And for the American Indians, even iron ore deposits would not have been considered resources. Only with the development of knowledge of how to cost-effectively convert materials to satisfy human needs do these materials become resources. As our knowledge increases, so do our reserves. This is why capitalism is the way out of the limited resources trap feared by Malthus, or the authors of The Limits to Growth. Julian Simon documented this with numerous studies of the trends of resource prices. In repeated studies, Simon found that the real prices of natural resources systematically fall over time. If they were becoming increasingly scarce, prices would be bid higher by entrepreneurs who were competing to get them. Instead, we see the opposite. But in Simon's studies, there was one resource price that consistently defied this downward trend: the price of human effort, and especially skilled, knowledgeable effort, often called human capital. Even as population has grown, humans as a resource have become scarcer. We don't think of humans as resources because each of us is an end rather than a means. But human capital, our abilities to contribute value, is indeed a resource. It is the nature of capitalism to expand this resource base. That's a part of the dynamic nature of capitalism and why it generates economic growth. And it is inextricably linked with entrepreneurship, the pricing process, and profit and loss. It is not simply scientific knowledge. The experience of the Soviet Union provides a good illustration of this last point. The Soviet Union had world-class scientists and theoretical engineers. The Soviet Union also had abundant reserves of minerals, fossil fuels, and the like. The Soviets could mobilize people and could use their available resources intensively. But they had no profit-loss signals to identify success or failure, and they could not economically innovate. Their economy stagnated and eventually led to their collapse. Had it simply been a matter of scientific knowledge, they would have prospered, but it is not. It's a matter of the economic system. They needed capitalism, not socialism.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now.
There is another important point about capitalism and the market system. Unlike alternatives, the capitalist system explicitly takes future uses of resources into account and provides incentives to conserve for the future, instead of consuming everything in the present. If the value of a quantity of resource is greater in the future than in the present, entrepreneurs can gain by reserving it until it's more highly valued. The modern capitalist economy has extensive futures and forward markets to do this. For example, if it appears that demand for a resource will rise substantially at a future date, anyone who notices this and acts on it can buy at today's relatively low price and sell at a relatively higher price in the future, shifting consumption of the resource to the future. An example of intertemporal arbitrage. This is entrepreneurship. As with all entrepreneurship, of course, this requires correct judgment and will work only as well as we are able to forecast the future. But the incentives of possible profits and loss direct actors' attention to predict as correctly as they can. And unlike alternative systems, such as allocation by government bureaucracies, the feedback of profit and loss identify whether the entrepreneur was correct or in error. This feedback helps direct future action. In the event of error, the misallocation is wasteful, and losses, again, give incentive to shut it down. Even for a person who cares little for the future, capitalism and the pricing system create incentives to take the future into account. Imagine a hypothetical person who owns an asset that will be valuable in the far future, but who cares only about its present market value. For example, imagine acreage covered with very small oak trees that will take 70 years to mature to a valuable source of wood for furniture and lumber. Even if the owner only cares about the price of the asset next year, the future value of the lumber 70 years hence can be capitalized into next year's price of the asset, and the owner is incentivized to care for the immature trees, even though he has no intention of harvesting the wood himself. This is, of course, a general principle. People systematically take into account the future uses by others of businesses, homes, land, and other assets that they have no intention of keeping themselves, simply because capital markets and accounting incorporate these future uses, which are then reflected in current prices. True, they do not do so perfectly, and they are subject to error, but until we learn to predict the future perfectly, something that will never happen, this will always be so. And unlike involuntary exchange and management, say by government regulation and direction, voluntary exchange will systematically incentivize mutually gainful trade and value creation. It is the nature of capitalism to expand the resource base, take the future into account, and conserve for the future when future uses are more important for satisfying human needs. One might ask then, well, what about the environment? How can environmental problems be addressed in a capitalist system? And what about the potential for overpopulation? These are good questions. Let's begin by returning to Malthus and his contention that population would grow faster than food supply, or, more generally, faster than the resource base. Imagine a world where there is no innovation, no entrepreneurship, and where there is continued population growth. In that world, Malthus' contention holds true. Population will expand to match the limited resource base. It will fill the environment to the carrying capacity, and then be checked from further growth by a lack of food and other resources. Malthus has described perfectly the world of animals. Animals do not innovate in any important sense. They passively accept the limits of the environment because they have no choice. It is their nature. Man is different. Man thinks. Man learns. Man anticipates. He envisions possible futures. He innovates and creates. And he does so particularly well if he operates within the constraints of the capitalist system. Malthus did not fully appreciate the potential for innovation. Few economists in his time did. But in Malthus' defense, he did argue for private property rights and markets, for creating incentives against overpopulation. He was arguing against proposals from the anarchist William Godwin, who claimed that if man abolished private property, government, and religious constraints, he could achieve utopia. To the contrary, Malthus warned, if we were to do that, we would indeed enter the Malthusian world of overpopulation, checked only by poverty and famine. In that sense, Malthus was right. He described the pre-capitalist world fairly well.
So we not only have a world that is wildly overpopulated, we also have a world where the population is growing at a rate that most demographers considered impossible just 20 or 25 years ago. Current 2% rate gives us an instantaneous doubling time of something in the vicinity of 35 to 40 years. And that is a rate of growth for the entire world which simply can't be sustained even for one more doubling. And I've oversimplified.
The so-called neo-Malthusians, such as entomologist Paul Ehrlich, miss the meaning of entrepreneurial innovation and the potential for it. That's why they predict doom from overpopulation. Ehrlich's model for human society is butterflies, his area of expertise. That's why he, and those of similar mind, regularly predict imminent doom and regularly get it wrong. It's the wrong model. They do not understand capitalism. Of course, there are real environmental problems. What can we say about them and their relation to the capitalist system? Careful study shows that all environmental problems and all so-called externalities stem from what is called the common pool problem. That is, inadequately, incompletely defined property rights. Rights will never be perfectly defined because defining rights is costly. Thus, in choosing actions, individuals won't take all the effects of their actions into account, effects that are called externalities. In some cases, these might be so severe as to warrant government action. However, several things should be kept in mind. First, in the event of a problem, we should ask, what are the lowest cost solutions, or as economists put it, least cost solutions? Government intervention typically fails to have any way to compare cost and benefit, unlike market transactions. Regulations and prohibitions nearly always fail to balance benefit with cost and can easily do more harm than good. Regulations also lock the system into a single solution. If entrepreneurship discovers a lower cost solution in the future, regulatory rules block it from implementation, a drawback of regulation pointed out by economics Nobel laureate James Buchanan. How might environmental problems be addressed by entrepreneurship and property rights? Recall the individually transferable fishing quotas from Lesson 4. Overfishing is a real threat to commercial fish populations, and it originates in the fact that most fish populations are unowned. To get rights over them, commercial fishers need to harvest them, and they race each other to do so. Fishing regulations can help reduce the harm, but typically fail to balance costs and benefits. ITQs, individually transferable quotas discussed in Lesson 4, effectively give fishermen property rights over fish still uncaught. Once they have secure rights to fish, fishermen are able to compare costs and benefits of harvest. As a result, they no longer need to race to harvest, which reduces cost, increases net value, and encourages conservation for the future by providing incentives to consider future value as well as present value, as we've just seen. New Zealand was the first country in the world to introduce ITQs. When this happened, one of the first responses of New Zealand fishermen was to not harvest fish, because now they could conserve them, allow the population to grow, and benefit from higher valued harvests in the future. Private property rights and markets incentivize protecting fish stocks for the future. Capitalism is the one sustainable economic system. In our final lesson, we will re-examine the moral nature of capitalism.
I remember saying back when the big local burst, too much pessimism could be deadly. Some people criticized me for trying to sugarcoat bad news. I merely wanted us to remember that there's a psychological factor in recession.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast. If you want to continue learning, please visit hillsdale.edu/course. There, you will find over 40 free online courses including Ancient Christianity, the Genesis story, classic children's literature, and many more. The courses include additional readings, study guides, fully produced videos, and you can chat with your fellow students on a dedicated forum. Upon completing a course, you will also get a certificate. All our courses are free because we believe that what you'll learn will enrich your life and that a virtuous citizen is the best defense for liberty. So pursue the education necessary for freedom and happiness at hillsdale.edu/course today. That's hillsdale.edu/course. Thanks for listening.